I think for me, debt and being able to raise money for a business is something that everybody should learn how to do. Everybody should understand how to do, because there will be times where it's necessary. There'll be times when it can kind of supercharge, take you on to the next level. Best businesses and the most sustainable ones are the ones that can be a business without needing all that debt. That can bootstrap themselves in a certain way. And I think for me, any business owner who has leverage is somebody who has distribution. All of this distribution is really access to an audience.
Thank you so much for clicking on this episode of The Millennial Entrepreneur. The ambition of the podcast is to show relatable stories from young entrepreneurs doing some incredible things to inspire the next generation, including you listening wherever you are. We've been doing this podcast for over 3 years and the ambition has not changed. The only thing that has changed is the scale of where we want to go. We want to bring on bigger guests for you guys to show more and more relatable and inspiring stories from young entrepreneurs across the world. The majority of you guys listening haven't subscribed to the podcast yet. All you have to do is click that subscribe button wherever you're listening, on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and that will allow us to bring on bigger guests and ask the questions to them that you really want to hear. And it really is that simple. So thank you again for clicking on the podcast and enjoy the episode. Amazing to have you on the podcast. How are you?
Good, buddy. Good. Thank you very much for having me.
My absolute pleasure. You're in Dubai at the moment, right?
I'm in Dubai, so a few hours ahead of the UK. Although I'm still suffering the English working day at the moment.
Yeah. Would you say most of the business that you do is still based in the UK, or would you say it's like Middle Eastern orientated now?
No. All of my business really is in the UK. I came to Dubai about 2.5 years ago just for lifestyle choices. I was a kind of a COVID refugee, and I tell a story that many English people do, which is kind of came in on a holiday and never went back again. But I did leave an office and staff and everybody else back in the UK. So I was never looking to, I guess, rebuild here. I was just looking to kind of rehome and re-lifestyle. So I work English hours because I work on all my UK businesses. But my core business is lending money to businesses, lending money to SMEs in the UK. But we raise our money internationally. So I do a lot of raising here. And I also do a lot of networking just for kind of great people to have in the Rolodex, because I've never come across anywhere else in the world like Dubai, which has got such a high concentration of high caliber people. But my core business is still GBP denominated.
Yeah, I mean, like the whole Middle East, not only Dubai, is definitely like increased in popularity in terms of like tech, property. Like a lot of entrepreneurs have moved there because they are very forward thinking, right? So I mean, I've even considered it myself. Like, it looks very cool.
I mean, I recommend it to everybody. I mean, and I don't know anyone who doesn't tell a positive story about it. And I've got friends here who have come as say, billionaire entrepreneurs, multimillionaire entrepreneurs, employees in a business, self-employed people themselves, and everybody, whatever kind of level of the ladder or stage of the game. Loves their life, has great success in their own business, in their own field. And it's just, I think, I don't like UK bashing because it feels like one of those things that we always moan about. But I do also feel over the last few years it's gotten easier to become a UK basher, in terms of.
I fully agree with you. Yeah, I fully agree with
you. The mentality is so negative and backward. The crime and it's just puts you in a bad mood before you start, whereas everybody over here is very, very growth orientated. It's abundance, not scarcity. It's safe, it's clean, and everybody wants to help each other as well.
But I would love to jump into your journey, because your journey is a very interesting one, where you had success very young, and then you had bankruptcy, and then now you said you moved to Dubai, and then you lend SMEs money, and then you do some investment as well. So it's a very cool journey to dig into. So I guess before we do, like, where did it all begin for you?
I mean, my entrepreneurial journey began in my very early teens, really. Insofar as I always knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur, and knew I wanted to be in business. My only real driver for that at the time was because I think in the early 90s, we lived under this kind of notion that the only way to make big money was to own your own business. I think that, coupled with the fact that my dad did have his own business as well, so I guess the entrepreneurial spirit was in the household. So I knew I wanted to be in business, and I spent my teenage years trying everything possible to make money, from buying and selling things at the market, to squatting on domain names, to being a table magician in a local Italian restaurant. My first kind of proper business was working in a family business from kind of 18 to 21. It was a failing business where I kind of got to get stuck in to every possible problem a business owner could ask for. Suppliers that didn't want to supply us, customers that didn't want to deal with us, banks who wanted to pull the plug. Every kind of financial and operational problem you could imagine. And I left there when I was 21, 22 to move into leisure. Again, I wasn't particularly qualified for it, but I thought the only qualification I needed was the fact that I was young and knew how to drink, and thought that if I owned a bar, all that money that came across the till would be mine, and I could drink beer, meet girls, and get paid for it at the same time. That really was all it took for me to want to be a bar owner, which I did for a couple of years to kind of varying degrees of unsuccess. But my first big hit, if you like, was when I was about 23. I was in the early stage of being 23, and I opened a strip club back in Wakefield, and I kind of decided to take the positives of the leisure business, find a solution to some of the failings, which was really lack of gross margin and lack of other income streams other than selling alcohol itself. And that opportunity presented itself, in the strip club industry. And I opened a venue in, when I was 23 in March 2004, which hit the ground running really. I think part good planning, part good timing. But it really did. It was a success from the outset. And I then really kind of fast forward 4 years. Over the next 4 years, I opened 11 strip clubs. I was the biggest strip club operator in the UK. I had 65 bars and pubs. I had a property group. I had retail stores, and I'd also started a small finance book at that time, lending money to other businesses as well. I kind of learned to become a lender by being a borrower, because all of those businesses that I kind of mentioned there, I grew them off the back of learning by accident really how to borrow money. When I opened that first strip club, I didn't know the first thing about borrowing money. I didn't even really know there was a place other than a bank to go to that that you could borrow from. And I got introduced to what nowadays we call alternative lenders, before the word alternative lender even existed. But what it did mean was that that empire, if you like, was built on a sand and a house of cards, and it was absolutely leveraged to the hilt with very expensive, very short-term debt. I think as people have learned over the last few years that when money's easy, in easy supply and lenders are lending, you can mask many problems, and really that's what I did for unknowingly for 4 years. And when the credit crunch of 2008 started, the rug was pulled from under us. We didn't have the capital base to support it. Our lenders weren't prepared to work with us. And kind of August, September 2008, when I was 27, lost a lot overnight. And it really was. Well, I say overnight. Maybe it wasn't overnight.
Well,
it really wasn't.
Let me just interrupt you very quickly. So, how did you actually lose that? How did you lose that overnight, as you said? Because 2008 happened. But you still had a successful chain of clubs, right? What went wrong?
Everything was successful in terms of turnover. Most things were successful in terms of profitability, but what none of them were very good at was producing cash, because they were all bought or grown using very short-term, very expensive money. So let's say as an example, let's say it cost me £500,000 to buy and refurbish and open a strip club, and let's say that venue made £150,000 profit. You take those two numbers, that's quite a nice return on investment. But if that 500,000 that I had to fit it out with, if I was paying that back over say 3 years, and with an interest rate of X, all of a sudden the cash flow needed to pay that lender was more than the profit. And I guess it's something I probably didn't appreciate at first, and then was too deep in and had to keep treading on the wheel. And it's something that I've been a lender now and been on the other side of the table, I see day in day out that that business owners absolutely do not appreciate the difference between profit and cash flow. And I may have been making £150,000 a year of profit on that club, but I had £250,000 of, let's say, balance sheet issue. Um, and that was basically, in simple terms, that was the problem on each of the venues. And as we opened the next one and maybe produced a bit more cash, it could mop up the first one's problem, and we went on the third one and it mopped up the second one's problem. But it was a treadmill. It was an unsustainable hamster wheel that was only working whilst people were prepared to continue to lend to us. And I guess I talk about it now, and you look back on those days in terms of, what it was kind of obvious stupidity. But I mean, I think it's very easy for people to say, from the outside in, when you can see the wood from the trees. I mean, I was, 24 when I started this journey. I'm not making any excuses for myself at all, but I didn't know any better, and I guess I was also blinded by the fact that all these hungry lenders or greedy lenders were keen to lend to me. Therefore, I was keen to borrow, and it was, when it was going good, it worked for us all. That they lent and made money, I borrowed and made money. I mean, there was a plan in place, which was that, once we'd achieved X amount of turnover, built a business of a certain size, it was going to get refinanced by a mainstream institution. And that was the kind of, let's say, the annoyance of it, if you like. That but when I was paying all that debt back over 3 years, it was totally unsustainable. Should we move that to 7, 8, 9, 10 years, it would be actually very, very cash generative. And we had agreements in principle to do that with 2 or 3 lenders, but by the time we'd got ourselves into the shape to be able to actually go and take the money off those lenders, the credit crunch had started. They'd lost their appetite, and unfortunately, we didn't have a way out and had to go back to negotiate with the lenders that we had, and it was just a hole that was too deep to negotiate out of. So when I say lost a lot overnight, the word overnight is a slight exaggeration, but it really was as quick as in a matter of weeks. And I've kind of since then I've heard the expression many times that when somebody went bankrupt, they go, "How did that person go bankrupt?" And the kind of humorous response, if you like, is at first very slowly and then very quickly. And really that is how it works. And I'm trying to think quickly off the top of my head of what let's say a non-financial analogy would be, but I guess it would be, I don't almost like running a water into a bottle that when the bottle's got a narrow neck and it's going down, it feels slow. As it gets to the top, all of a sudden it's like glug and spills over.
I was going to say, Matt, do you think a similar thing is happening now, where people were not as bad as 2008 for sure, because there were things have changed, I think, in terms of structures, but like people were very close, used to like very cheap credit, and also to a point where a lot of venture capital firms were giving out money for, like, frankly, not very great ideas just because credit was very cheap. And so you had a situation where a lot of businesses were being invested in, and now it's a situation where me as a business owner, I've got a SaaS business, as people know. I'm trying to raise investment fairly soon for it, and I've been told by a lot of like founder friends of mine that the situation now is it's very difficult to raise money. But I guess, are they just comparing it to maybe the last like a few years where credit was like very, very cheap?
I mean, there's probably a couple of different questions and a couple of different answers in there. I mean, if we're talking about raising equity versus raising debt, then equity is always a tougher gig to raise than debt, and particularly now with people being cautious and events over the last kind of 3, 6, 12 months, raising equity is much harder than it was. But going to what I thought your first question was going to be, that how does now, i.e. 2022, 23, differ to 2008? And you were saying it's not as bad as. I would say the situation now is 10 times worse, or will be 10 times worse than it was back in 2008. But it's just been masked for longer. I mean,
in terms of what?
Well, I guess in terms of the balloon that's blowing, waiting to burst at some point, and I guess the longer it's prolonged for, the bigger the bubble is to burst. And really, I mean, we're talking about it now in say 2023. From 2019, this problem had been going on for 4, 5, 6 years, but probably a year or two too long at that point. And there was many zombie businesses. There's many individuals who were over leveraged with the personal credit, and really they were all due to go pop around kind of 2018, 19, certainly by 2020, and And then, when COVID started to happen, everybody thought, well, that is the writing on the wall. That is the point that these people are definitely now going to hit a wall, because they've been living on easy credit. They've been robbing Peter to pay Paul, and now that's now the turnover is going to stop. Then they're all going to go bust. But then, we got the absolute opposite effect in COVID, because of all the bounce back loans, quantitative easing, concessions that were given to people. And there's just been, I guess, other, let's say, macroeconomic events that have continued since then, which, for whatever reason, have all meant that more money's been put into the system, or more problems have been protracted. And so I think for me, there is. It's been easier than ever for these businesses to continue to survive. Businesses that just shouldn't exist. People that have found it very easy to call themselves entrepreneurs because they have been a business owner, but they would have been infinitely more profitable working for somebody else, because they've got businesses that aren't really businesses. They aren't business owners, but they've been able to.
It's more like jobs that they've created for themselves.
Exactly, and join the dance by that availability of easy credit. Now, look, I can't tell you whether the rug's going to be pulled in 3 months or 12 months or 3 years or whatever, but it has to go. And I think when it does go, it will fall a hell of a lot further than it did back in 2008.
But so bringing it back to, I guess, like people listening, a lot of, as I said to you before, audiences, around like early 20s, late 20s, some people at school, even like university. So in terms of like the next generation of entrepreneurs going into this climate, as you just described, like what can they do to sort of, I guess, be prepared for this? And also the other angle of like what opportunities exist now that perhaps wouldn't have existed if this climate wasn't there.
You can argue debt both ways, and it's a good thing and a bad thing. I think for me, debt and being able to raise money for a business is something that everybody should learn how to do. Everybody should understand how to do, because there will be times where it's necessary. There'll be times when when it can kind of supercharge you and take you on to the next level. I think really the best businesses, and the most sustainable ones are the ones that can be a business without needing all that debt. That can bootstrap themselves in a certain way. And I think for me, any business owner who has leverage is somebody who has distribution, and whether that is I say all of this distribution is really access to an audience. And we were just talking a bit, off camera before we started, about, I guess what would I be advising to kids of today? I've got a 1 week old and a 16, 17 year old. I think, for me, what they've got that I didn't have, and, I still like to consider myself not old, but as young as I think I am, I grew those businesses in an era before social media, before crowdfunding, before alternative lending. And I'm not going to say the internet was in its infancy, because it certainly wasn't in its infancy, but it was 5 or 6 or 7 years old as opposed to 27 years old. And what anyone going into business has got today is the ability to be able to do something at such scale that we never had 20 years ago. So I think my advice to any young entrepreneur is really to find a way to own and control that distribution. Whether it's through mailing lists, whether it's through partnerships, whether it's through social media. But if you control the distribution, you can build a sustainable high margin business in any market condition. I think when you see the big people, when you see business owners hitting it big, with big numbers, whether that's let's say a Zuckerberg with a Facebook, or or The Rock with his tequila, these people, for slightly differing reasons, it's all about being able to do something at scale and having distribution to the masses. And look, debt's great. The ability to raise money is great, to be able to sprinkle in there at times, but I think it's just been used for too long as a mask on the truth, really, and people almost think that the ability to raise money constitutes profit in itself.
You talk about debt quite a bit, and then like when you say the question around like equity, and you said it's very difficult. It's more difficult to raise equity now than it is debt. You mentioned. So
Well, I think it's more difficult now, but I say it's more difficult in general, really. I may say that because I come from a debt space. I mean, look, if someone spends all day raising equity, they might tell you it's more easy to raise equity than it is debt. But I think the reason I find equity, so why I find debt easier to raise, and why I believe anyone would, is because debt is normally a much more simpler and quantifiable proposition. I'm going to lend you £100,000. You're going to pay me £20,000 interest. You're going to give me £120,000 back. This is your business with your cash flow, how you're going to pay it back, and this is the piece of security, if appropriate, of what I'm going to take if it all goes wrong. It's 3 or 4 or 5 very tangible, quantifiable variables that most people can understand. When it comes to raising equity, there's just so many other things that come into play. The success of the business, the quality of the management team, the ups and downs of the market, and you could argue that some of those have an impact on the debt as well, and they do. But if you're a secured lender, which I am, and which many other, I guess, lenders are in their own different ways of taking security. If the business has its downs, well, you've still got something tangible that you're going to take. So and also then when it comes to raising equity, you need to be talking to people who've got a specialism and understanding of that. You mentioned your SaaS business. That's great if you're talking to SaaS investors, people with that knowledge. But if you're raising money for a bar, you need people who understand bars. If you're raising money for biotech, you need people who understand that. And it's just a much harder game.
would you say? I mean, I think I know the answer to this, but just for people listening, like whether it would be debt or equity, would you say it depends on obviously like the business model of what you're trying to do? As you said, like a strip club or a bar, given that they're more cash flow, like they're going to generate cash flow quicker than say a SaaS business, because you need to put time into development, and there's more risk in terms of like, will businesses actually buy a SaaS, whereas bars like very established. Like debt probably makes more sense in that space, whereas equity probably makes more sense in the SaaS space.
I mean, it's gonna depend on the timing of the business. Like you said, the stage that the business at. Whether it's generating cash, etc. I mean, if you're a new start business, or an early stage business, then you've got no revenues, or you may have revenue, but you probably won't have profit, and certainly won't have cash flow to pay that debt. And as many business owners, or many, let's say particularly naive business owners, will want to concoct a way that they can say, well, okay, we can only pay you a small bit back now, and a bigger bit back later. But ultimately, that's not how it works as a lender. And lending money really is about simplicity, predictability, security, and that is exactly what investing in a business from an equity perspective isn't. Now, again, it's not that one's right and one's wrong, because you invest in debt, and the returns will be relatively low, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12%. You can invest in equity and you can get 100x your money. But then, for every one that gets you 100x, you've got, 45 other deals that lose your money, and, 4 or 5 that are making you 2, 3, 4, 5 times. So, like I said, it's not that one's right and one's wrong. It's ultimately, what do you know? What do you understand? I think, but if you're going to invest successfully in equity, you have to have a very mixed portfolio, a very large mixed portfolio, and other than the 1 in a million lucky people, anyone who tells you about a 100x return they've got will also have plenty of stories of absolute write-offs to tell you. Whereas in
I was going to say, like, that you're 100% right, and that's actually like how the business model of like a venture capital firm is structured, right? Like they know that's going to happen, so that's why they invest in like multiple different businesses. So for a venture capital to invest in you're not entirely like special, unfortunately, because they invest in so many different types of businesses in, say, a niche like AI or Web3 or whatever. Like, just because they think that industry is going to take off, and you might be one of, say, 20 investments that hopefully one of you does make 100x, because that will cover
Yeah.
the other 19 that don't do that.
Absolutely. I mean, and it's just a completely different mindset as that venture capitalist. Like as someone in a debt space, you're looking for something very, very, let's say, simple and predictable, and and almost, like, let's say, guaranteed quantities of someone who can perform. Sometimes you look at businesses that have raised venture capital or had equity put into them, and you think, how the hell did that lunatic, with that non-existent idea, go and raise 10 million, and I can't even get someone to lend me 50 grand for my business that's got 10 years of history. And then the reality is, or the answer is, because that venture capitalist may think that guy's a lunatic, but I think, I don't care if he's a lunatic, because I've got 20 million to deploy here, and I'm putting 1 million into 20 different businesses. And and I know I'm going to lose 15 of them. So if I lose 15 on a lunatic who could shoot for the moon, then fine, I'll lose it on that lunatic. But I'll have one that makes the money. And yeah, it's just a very different game.
Very true. The question I want to end the podcast with, Matt, it's been so good having you on, and I think you must have thought about this question before, but say if you were to start from scratch today, or like you put yourself back like a few years where you don't have anything and you're in 2023 right now, what would you be doing? Like, what's the sort of business you'd be running? How would you be running it? What's the structure? Like, who would you be going to? Have you thought about that?
I mean, I wouldn't say I've thought about what sector I would go into today, because I think the best sector for me to advise anyone to go into is the sector that they understand the best. Now, you know what, that may be a sector that's got a ceiling compared to something else. But I think the benefits of getting it right in a sector that you understand far outweigh the benefits of getting it wrong in a sector that you don't understand. And like, for example, I always say I'm not really a tech guy. I'm absolutely not a biotech guy, and some of these. Yes, that means that it precludes me from some really big returns, but it also saves me from plenty of losses, because they would be losses, because I'd just be getting the wool pulled over my eyes left, right, and centre. So I think it's sector. I always say I'm sector agnostic, and I'm agnostic to anybody else's sector, because if they understand it, then that's good for them. I think the things I would do different to what I'd done, say, 20 years ago, is approach things with less ego, of wanting to own and control absolutely everything. And I've really learned over the last few years to value quality partners. And if you'd have asked me, 20 years ago, it was all very much about, I've got to be the big guy, I've got to own 100% of all the equity. I would happily pay other people money, but I would never, I didn't want partners. I didn't want to be thought of as anything less than above someone else and 100%. But if you ask me now, I'll happily take small pieces of lots of pies with lots of different partners, as long as those are the right partners who've got things to bring to the table. Because there's so much more scope to grow quicker. And we were talking earlier on this podcast about the power of distribution, and for me, to be able to fast track what I want, by being able to distribute to other partners, or by having other partners who've got access to something I haven't got. That's what I'd do. That would save me a lot of pain, and that would make my journey a lot quicker.
I think that's an excellent bit of advice. I think, like, you do still see that, like, it's a very personal thing that, I think I had it as well, especially, is like, I want to be doing everything, like control every element of the business. And what you physically can't, but also it's not efficient for you to be doing that, because there's people that have expertise in certain areas that you just don't. And it's better for you to focus on the areas of the business that you have expertise in, because that will just lead to more profitable outcomes in the long term. Why did you think that back then you were like that? Do you think it's like a vanity thing that people like deal with?
I mean, I would say vanity, undoubtedly, but I think really it's because I didn't know any better. And I think one of the areas I've been, other people would look at me as being unfortunate, and I'd say I've been remarkably lucky, is to have so many failures and mistakes and cock ups along the way, because you only learn from the things that go wrong. I think, particularly when it comes to business, particularly when it comes to finance. when things go right, it's very easy to try and pat yourself on the back and think you're amazing because you had a great plan in place and that's why it went right. When you never really know if that's the case, but when things go wrong, you get to look at why they went wrong. You get to be able to dissect them and unravel them and make sure you don't make that mistake again. But unfortunately, or fortunately, maybe when people have catastrophic events in business, it's they either never have it or they have it once and it's never to be repeated. And I've been, like I say, inverted commas, lucky that I've had so many of these catastrophic events that I've learned so much, at a young age. And I guess a big part of my business model now is helping other people not make the mistakes. I mean, whether that's helping from an altruistic level because I might be making content on social media, or helping from a personal profit level because I can partner with these businesses, lend to these businesses, and show them the error of my ways and where I went wrong. So yeah, listen, vanity always comes into play, but really, I just didn't know any better, and I didn't have anyone to teach me.
Well, I guess that's a good message to end on in terms of, well, yeah, if you don't know any better, then if you listen to this podcast, then now you do know better. And the vanity thing, you definitely know if it is a vanity thing, then that's something you need to work on, because that definitely holds you back, I would say. In success longer term.
I mean, it doesn't, like, so, with the whole partnership thing and stuff, it really, it's the vanity of thinking that, I know better than you, or, I don't want to share anything with you. And there's no logic to it. It's just purely vanity driven.
Thank you so much, Matt, for coming on the podcast. It's such a pleasure having you on. How can people stay in touch with you and what you're doing?
So I have a podcast myself as well, which is the Matt Haycox Show. And I'm also on all things social. I am the Matt Haycox. That's TheMattHaycox. I have a newsletter that hangs on my website, which is matt-haycox.com. So follow me on social, subscribe to my newsletter, check out my podcast. And if you've got any questions, if you've got any problems and you want me to stop you making your mistakes, then drop me a line and I'll help you remove that vanity.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much, my friend. And yeah, I'm sure we'll speak very soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you.